high five. Saludos and salutations, Broncos country. Welcome to another exciting episode of Broncos Talk. I'm your host, Adan Diaz, and I'm joined with my co-host at Richie. Richie, how are you today, my friend?
Not bad. I just wanted to say that intro with the mile high five. I am a fan. I am a big fan. That is amazing. I love that.
I love it too. And the best part about it is Isaiah and Johnny are both on cue, and there's no lag. Like they had a little bit of internet trouble on Sunday, from what I heard. So
I agree.
My high five is perfect when it's in sync.
I agree.
Anyways, guys, welcome everyone. Come on in, have a seat, pull up a chair, grab your favorite drink or food or snack or what have you, and just sit back and let's all enjoy the moment. Even though it is off season, but we have quite a bit to talk about today, Richie. And the topic of today's show, matter of fact, is about right tackles. Now, I felt that this should be an important point for us to talk about because this seems to be an Achilles heel for our Denver Broncos. For the last couple of years, the right tackle position has just been something that, we've been kind of getting on Elway about when he was the GM, where he thought he had the answer in Menelik Watson. And then, there was Stevenson. And then for some reason, Elijah Wilkinson was thought to be the answer. And all those guys, unfortunately, were just, like turnstile round right tackles. And it did our quarterbacks no favor in terms of trying to keep them, keep the jerseys clean, so to speak. So now that we're dealing with the injury to one Juwan James, a man whose name who has been synonymous in Broncos country with just, I don't even know how to say it, but I've seen memes. I've seen people poke fun at him about, saying how he's made of glass and everything. And, I do understand it hurts. It sucks that as a human being, he was trying to stay fit. He was trying to get healthy and, go out there and be ready to play for what the Broncos were paying him. But unfortunately, these type of freak accidents happen. And, we're not going to get into it about him, should he get paid or should he get not paid, because that's still a hot button issue. And I feel like there is no right or wrong answer towards that. But Rich, do you think that the answer for a possible replacement of right tackle is out there?
Well, are we talking short term or long term? So let's just go back. If I can unpack what you said earlier, because I think you went through a long, storied and concerning history of our right tackles in the lead in there. So when you look at what we did before, Elway consistently went to other teams' cast-offs and or bargain basement type tackles to fill what is arguably deemed a critical position on every other roster, it seems, but the Denver Broncos, according to Mr. John Elway. So, and again, I completely agree with what you said you're not doing your quarterback any favors if you're not bookending him on either side of the offensive line to ensure that edge rushers don't get around those corners. Otherwise, you start having a Sam Darnold on your team who starts seeing ghosts. So we need to be very, very careful as a team with what we want to do. And we, again, have a young quarterback in Drew Lock. And I think we would be kidding ourselves if we couldn't at least attribute a small portion, not all of it, but at least a small portion of what we saw last season with the early struggles of Elijah Wilkinson last year. If you recall the Pittsburgh Steelers game, the Tennessee Titans game, and I can't remember what the third game was, but I like those first three games of last season, we had turnstiles at right tackle. I realize that they are in fact human beings, and I'm not that naive or silly, but they were literally turnstiles. They were a modest obstacle for the opposing defensive lines, and that is a problem. Now, looking ahead, this is also one of the reasons why I thought it was so important in the draft for 2021. There was two right tackles that were specifically right tackles that were geared, and their technique was geared towards the right tackle position, that I absolutely loved in this upcoming draft. 3 if you include the guy that I wanted in the first round. But I was willing to have us maybe trade back and gain some extra capital and whatnot. And those 2 in the later part of the draft, in the second or third round, would be Brown in the third and Jenkins in the second. Now, I would have even been okay if we had traded back pretty deep into the first, get a whole whack of extra picks, and then take Jenkins near the bottom end of the first round, because I actually think the value would have been there for us to do it as well, because having that 5th year, especially if the tackle works out, is huge for your team to make sure you have a cost-controlled guy at tackle. In terms of the free agency market, I think Kelly is your best bet, because that is his standard normal position, and he played that for the entirety of the 2020 season. His previous role in Tennessee was a swing tackle, so he does have some positional versatility, which can help us as well in a pinch. And I think between him and Calvin Anderson, keeping both on this roster would be a pretty wise move for the Denver Broncos, given our history.
Very well said, my friend. And before we continue, let's say hello to our people in the room who are watching us live during the fact. Michelle Ortega, I hope I said your name right. She says, hola, welcome. Thank you for watching the show. Larry Archer also says, what up? Thanks for coming and watching the show. Yes, beards are in right now. MH Sports 58 says, what's good, Broncos country? Thanks for coming and tuning in, my friend.
Thank you for joining.
Bob Skinner, he also says, hello, Broncos country. Hello, sir. And of course, our good friend Shadowjacker says, good evening, Broncos country. The man who is in charge of the MHRT after hours nightclub scene. Guys, make sure if you're watching us live, you have some questions, you get them in, and Richie and I will try to answer them to the best of our ability during the show. Any comments, ideas, or suggestions are always welcome. But going back to what we were talking about, Rich, the right tackle. Now, I know Dennis Kelly was a name that was being thrown around as a possible suitor for replacement. Also, Bobby Massey, former Bear, was also mentioned. There was a name that I read just before we came on the air, former Panther. I can't remember his name, but he was also signed as a not a starting right tackle, but more as a backup to the starting right tackle. So they're trying to build depth at right tackle. Not that they don't have faith in Calvin Anderson, who did a pretty decent job last season. But unfortunately, Calvin Anderson did not put enough tape out there to say, he can be starting right tackle with confidence, and then they can build behind him. So hopefully Calvin Anderson stays in maybe a second player depth role. And whoever the Broncos has just signed off of, I guess you could say free agency, because he wasn't from another team. So they can build depth behind it. And it's depth. Now, I trust Mike Munchak. I think Mike Munchak has done a pretty good job with this offensive line. Now, he's obviously gotten some good key pieces in, Netane Moody and with the gut, as you mentioned earlier. So he's got some toys to play with. Unfortunately, both of those toys are not right tackle suitable. But it's very good, comforting to know that should, knock on wood, something happens during the regular season, if a guard goes down, or if Cushenberry goes down, if he's the starter, that there's depth behind that position, And also, Garrett Bowles, who played outstanding last season and was made his proof worth in being a left tackle, that he's probably my one guy who I really get concerned about sometimes, because if he goes down, that offensive line is in deep, deep trouble.
Garrett Bowles?
Yeah.
Well, he was down for that 1 week. So that's actually where I'm least concerned, is Garrett Bowles going down, because I think we as a fan base need to give Calvin Anderson credit where it's due. Garrett Bowles had to miss a game last season. And wow. I mean, can we like I said, I think it was last week or the week before. I think it was last week when we had the Prophet on. We need to give Anderson credit where credit is due. There is a reason, I believe, where we hedged our bets a little bit on the tackle in the draft. I don't necessarily agree with that as a strategy for our team, because I believe that Calvin Anderson proved that he may well even end up being a starting left tackle for some team if he can get another shot to prove that, that one game where he really did knock it out of the park. If he can prove that was not just like a one-hit wonder, and he proved he can repeat that a few times, maybe. Obviously, we don't want Bulls out of the game, but I'm just saying we saw what Anderson can do, and he did a very good job. My concern with what we're going to end up at right tackle specifically this season is we're doing a disservice to Drew Lock. And frankly, we're doing a disservice to any quarterback that we bring in. So, I mean, even if we end up with Teddy Bridgewater under center and Drew Lock sitting on the bench backing him up, we are not doing any of our starting quarterbacks any favors whatsoever with our current approach to the right tackle position. We had opportunities in the draft. We opted to not secure that spot, and anyone that wants to say otherwise is just lying to themselves. George Paton made a call to jump up to grab a running back in the second round. So if George Paton truly wanted to take care of the right tackle position, he could have ensured that he landed that tackle by trading up and locking in that player that we needed in the 2021 draft.
Well, you know what? And that's an interesting point you bring up there. And before I make my comment, the Nothing Rhymes with podcast fellas, they say, what up, boys, as well as the Johnny Baki in the house. Thank you so much for joining, my friend. By the way, I like that your last name is Baki because it rhymes with Taki, and they're some of my favorite chips. So I know that's me being a fat man, but I don't care. Before we go to Shadowjacker's question, here's Mohammed Badji. Mohammed Badji says, what's up, fam? Thanks for joining the show. You know what? I think that Peyton didn't address the right tackle issue, not because he was looking for a starter, but to me, it seems that not regarding for what could happen June 1st, but it seems to me that Peyton was trying to keep the faith in the current players. If Peyton went on and got another right tackle, that could have maybe done something towards, Juwan James' integrity. Not saying that he's going to replace him automatically, but it's kind of like, holding your feet to the fire. Kind of like if the Broncos would have drafted Justin Fields, that would have, sent the signal to Drew Lock, like, hey, your job is now in danger. You might not even get to be the starter, instead of trying to get somebody of a mentorship type of role for Drew Lock. That could still happen, by the way. But I feel like the reason he didn't go tackle was because Peyton just got maybe there's just somebody that wasn't there, somebody that Peyton liked. He probably had a draft for it and he really stuck to it. I mean, who knows? And we all said the same thing. Had Juwan James got hurt a week before the draft, then yeah, obviously we may have ended up with Slater instead of Patrick Surtain. I mean, who knows?
Sure.
But I like to believe that whatever Peyton's reasoning was why he didn't go offensive tackle was because he was trying to build depth in other places that, needed depth. Not so much to start, but any right tackle that would have gotten drafted that wasn't a first-round pick would have more than likely had to play behind Juwan James at that moment in time. So
sure.
Had they gotten drafted and now Juwan James is injured, then it's like, okay, well, now we have a rookie right tackle that's going to go out there and they're either going to try to, do their best to keep whoever takes the ball under snap at center, not get injured.
Sure. I want to address kind of to your points there, and then I want to get to, there's a couple comments there that I wouldn't mind pulling up that we can speak to them. Mm-hmm. So on the first hand, not taking Justin Fields in fear of putting Drew Lock on notice. Well, the Broncos already did that right after the draft, effectively, when they said there's going to be a quarterback competition between him and Teddy Bridgewater. And then when Fangio came out on the record and said they're splitting reps 50-50. So if we were truly concerned about putting Drew on notice, then comments like that are not the way to avoid putting Drew on notice. So that's kind of one issue with kind of, that kind of as a sentiment to say like, oh, you don't want to take a quarterback because you don't want to put your quarterback and Drew on notice. We've already done that basically. And then on the flip side of that is Juwan James, it's been widely reported leading into both this season and in last season. I think Garrett Bowles was even the one that came out publicly and basically called it out. And you have to assume that sentiment's coming not just from Garrett. He's just bold enough to actually say it publicly. Is Juwan James had to earn the trust back of the locker room and the rest of the offensive line And I have a funny feeling that part of that did not necessarily come from him opting out of COVID, because I think a lot of players can appreciate and understand that when your wife is pregnant and about to give birth and a pandemic hits with a bunch of unknown variables, I think most people can understand someone wanting to make sure their family is safe, especially with all those unknown variables. Now, on the flip side of that, I think the big issue came from 2019, where he was medically cleared to return to the field and he said no. And it was widely reported and known by many that he was repeatedly saying no, despite having doctors saying, you're good to go, have at it. So I think that's what the issue is with those two pieces. And I put all the blame squarely on Peyton for not targeting and going after a right tackle. To that end, Mr. Boggins, who corrected his kind of post there in terms of being sniped, that was exactly my point, though, Boggins, right? Which was Peyton wanted to make sure that his running back that they wanted to target in this draft was not sniped, and they traded up for him in the second round. So if Peyton and the Denver Broncos wanted to, and I mean truly wanted to, there was nothing to prevent them once they lost Jenkins in the second and knew that their target was, I believe, Brown in the third, as has been generally reported, because he was taken two or three picks above. And Peyton indicated in his post-draft presser that the two tackles that they had in mind were taken a couple picks before them. Well, that fit the bill. Jenkins was taken a couple picks before them in the where they would have picked at least in the second, and Brown was taken about 3 picks or 4 picks, I believe, before them in the third. So I think that pretty much fit with how things fell in the draft. But my point being, if you want a right tackle and you think that they can eventually start for your team, trading a couple later round picks away for a premium position like a right tackle on your team is pocket change and a rounding error in the scheme of things, if that's going to end up being even a starter or a backup on your team for that specific position.
Mm-hmm. Shadow Jacker has a question for us. He says, thoughts on Mike Munchak landing a head coaching spot somewhere if he can get our offense in the, if he can't, I believe he meant to say, if he can't get our offense in the top 10 this season. Now, if I understand Mike Munchak's history in the league, he used to be a head coach, and he was the OC for the Steelers. So I don't see Mike Munchak getting another head coaching job elsewhere unless he goes to a team that's really desperate and, you know, they're willing to throw, you know, caution to the wind and say, hey, go out there and try your best. But I don't really see any teams doing that at the moment. So I don't see Mike Munchak going for a head coaching job, but he could go out and get maybe an offensive coordinator spot if he goes to a team where he feels that the offensive line is good and, you know, he can work with the offense. I mean, who knows? But I'd like to think that Mike Munchak is pretty happy in Denver. And going back to something that Boggins just said in that previous comment, where he believes that Mike Munchak wasn't high on certain tackles in the draft, you kind of have to also take into consideration that he was in the draft room with Fangio and Peyton that night. So I'm pretty sure he had people on his board and he, you know, gave his 2 cents so that Peyton took into consideration what Mike Munchak wants to, you know, help mold and create and what have you. So to answer your question, Shadow Jacker, I don't see Mike Munchak getting another job unless he gets offered an offensive coordinator spot elsewhere, or if the offensive line just totally collapses, which I really doubt unless he ends up playing with like third, second, or maybe even third string, you know, off linemen who are just not that great, or the gameplay and the current offensive line deteriorates and it gets to a level where Peyton is just not satisfied. That's the only way I see Mike Munchak getting fired, is if the O-line regresses instead of embettering itself.
I'm not sure Munchak even wants necessarily that additional piece. You got to remember, one of the reasons why Munchak came to Denver was because of family reasons. His family is all in Denver, including his child and his grandkids. So one of the reasons Munchak is here is specifically because of family. And that's really why he is here to begin with. So he would have to probably be offered a pretty lucrative offensive coordinator position for him to even consider it. And even then, he might be in one of those situations where he wants to stick more West Coast so that the travel time to come back to Colorado, which is where his family is a relatively short flight for him to make if and when he needs to make it. So I would question whether or not Munchak is really intentionally trying to throw his hat into the ring for an offensive coordinator position. The guy that might be trying to elevate himself at some point this season is Shula. So Shula is sitting behind as the quarterback's coach, with Shurmur being basically on the hot seat with a performer or get booted, which is what I think most people think where Shurmur's sitting right now. Shula may be in that running to say, hey, if I get brought in and I can turn the Denver Broncos offense from 0 to hero in the advent that Shurmur gets fired midseason, then Shula may well be more into the mold of what you're talking about in terms of Munchak, where he may be the one trying to vie to either become a permanent offensive coordinator or try to elevate himself back up into the head coaching conversation.
No, that's actually pretty well said. And we're going to pull up this comment from Boggins. It says, Jenkins also had injury and character concerns. Putting the blame on Peyton because James tore his Achilles is ridiculous. And that's actually a very, I actually agree with Boggins, because I also have seen online where some people, I took it as trolling. And I guess I don't even know if you can really say they were Broncos fans, but it seemed to me more like a troll where they were putting the blame on Peyton that, Juwan James tore his Achilles, like it was Peyton's fault. Now, obviously,
the blame is not on Peyton for him tearing his Achilles. That's just silly.
Yeah, it is silly. And for people to make that assumption or just to even utter that, it's just completely ridiculous. As Broncos fans, as a football fan in general myself, I don't wish injury on anybody, not even against our most hated rivals like the Chiefs and the Raiders and the Chargers, because I always feel that if you're going to beat a team like that, you want to beat them when they're at their best, just like they want to play you when you're at their best, because the victory when you beat them at their best tastes a lot better than, if you went out and you beat whoever the backup for the Chiefs is, playing behind Mahomes. So
sure. The only thing I will interject into there just super quick is, you're obviously silly to try and blame Juwan James's injury on Peyton. Now, I will roll that back and pull that back just a little bit. Is Juwan James's history with us to date has been riddled with injury. Now, you're not going to predict and have some psychic dream one day and say, I know what I need to do. That's just ridiculous. And that's just silly as a Broncos fan. However, I do think it is very short-sighted to not look ahead when you have an opportunity to bring in a younger draft pick to learn behind an experienced right tackle, knowing that right tackle has been injured on this team in the not so distant past in 2019. So I do think that there is some blame to be put on Peyton, not for the injury itself. That, again, that's silly. However, for not planning for that injury when you had an opportunity to potentially bring in someone else to backstop that position, I do think there is some blame to be put on Peyton. That being said, I do really like our undrafted free agent right tackle that we brought in. Was it Hillerman, I think is his name, or Heilerman? I actually liked him, and I had him in my kind of back of the draft type guys to maybe take in the later part of the draft for the 2021. So the fact that we nabbed him as a UDFA, and I believe he was signed as a priority signing for us. So the fact that we did that, I will again give Peyton credit where credit's due there. But you still need someone to play the starting position, at least for the first bit, to allow these guys to gain traction and get some practice.
No, and I totally agree with you. Ivan Diaz, my cousin, he says, thank you for Justin Fields and sort of thanks for smoking Jay. He refers to Jay Cutler. Cheers. Keep up the good work. Thanks, Primo. I appreciate it. You know what? I was actually watching some old film of Jay Cutler, because during that time in the early 2000s, I wasn't watching every single Broncos game because I didn't have access to it. I would usually read up about after the fact, after every Sunday. But when I went back and I watched the highlights, Jay Cutler was a pretty decent to really good rookie quarterback, and I always wondered what could have been if they hadn't reached out and I don't know who was it. Was it Josh McDaniels or whoever it was that made that pretty crazy trade to send Kyle Orton to Denver and Jay Cutler to Chicago? But You know what? And Jay Cutler kind of got the last laugh on our Broncos his last game as a Miami Dolphin, where he just kind of ran up the score on a struggling Broncos defense in 2017, I believe it was. 2017, 2018, whatever the last time he played as a Dolphin. But as for Justin Fields, hey, I hope and I've said this before, I hope he works out for you guys. That quarterback division in Chicago is getting kind of crazy with everything that's supposed to happen, especially if one Aaron Rodgers leaves Green Bay. That NFC North is just going to be a free for all for who's going to be the reigning king, or the new king, I should say.
I agree.
Boggins comes in and he says, if Gordon tore his Achilles or Callahan or Darby still wasn't healthy, everyone would be angry with Peyton that he didn't draft a running back or a cornerback. Hindsight 2020.
Yeah, but he did draft a cornerback.
I'm saying if he didn't.
Yeah, but he did. That's my point. He did. So he drafted a young rookie in the first round. That was not my favorite pick, but nonetheless, I do think that he will work out really well in the NFL. But he did draft a cornerback, and he did draft a running back. So, hindsight isn't 2020. He drafted them. Gordon's coming on the last year of his 2-year deal. So again, that's prudent planning on Peyton's part. Again, credit where credit's due. I actually really like the Williams pick. And then he also drafted a cornerback. Again, looking at both Darby and Callahan, who have both had injuries in their past. Frankly, Callahan was injured a good portion of last year. So, I mean, he did go out and do what he needed to do to try and backfill those positions, get young talent, particularly in those two positions, as you mentioned, that we had injury in. The only one that he seemingly did not do so in the 2021 draft for was the right tackle position. And hindsight being 2020, perhaps he would have revised his draft strategy if he knew that it was going to happen. But we don't currently have on our roster right now, and we didn't going into the draft either, which I think is an important point to make. Going into the 2021 draft, we did not have a large enough complement of depth to backfill that right tackle spot if Juwan James either got hurt at the beginning of the season or going into the season as he did.
Mm-hmm. And this kind of brings up to what we were talking about earlier. Jason O'Neill, thanks for joining the show, my friend. He says, this may have been touched on, and if so, sorry. No worries. What is known about Ryan Pope, the new lineman Denver signed? Thanks. That's his name, Ryan Pope. I was trying to think something.
Yeah, you brought him up earlier.
Yeah, church. Yeah. His name is Ryan Pope. Thank you so much for clarifying that for us, Jason. You know what? He's supposed to be a second tier, maybe even a third tier guy. He's not supposed to be the veteran. From what I read in said article, I think it was published by MHH. They said that he is being signed as kind of like as a veteran type of deal, since he's been around the league a little bit, but he's not supposed to be starting. He's not the main catch that the Broncos are going for. The Broncos, I believe, are still trying to go for, like we said earlier, Dennis Kelly. There was also another right tackle that won 2 championships in New England. His name escapes me. Those two guys are what I believe are the front runners for the right tackle position. Bobby Massey might be a second, close, maybe a third. But those top 3 are the top 3 names I've been seeing for the possible right tackle position.
They may also have a standing offer for the KC tackle who's injured right now.
Oh, Mitchell Schwartz.
Mitchell Schwartz. He, as I understand it, given his injuries at the moment, would not pass a physical. So the what they may be doing right now, the Denver Broncos, is bringing in kind of guys to fill that role, fill that spot, and they may actually be targeting Schwartz, who would be someone that knows the KC offense and obviously defense well enough, which would be a good win for us as a team, and was a halfway decent tackle at least in KC, especially when he was healthy. So we may be waiting to see, and we may have a standing offer out to him. We don't know, right? We're just, we're fans talking football. And so if they have a standing offer to him, they can just be bringing in guys like Pope, for example, who are, camp fodder potentially, or filler just for the time being until we get the guy we want.
Yeah, I totally agree. Richard Martin's a name we haven't seen
I didn't
on
even
here.
see that comment.
Thanks for joining the show, my friend. He says Pope sounds like a camp body. I guess it does. I mean, it could have a nice ring to it should he ever get to see the field. But I kind of like that step of the Broncos trying to build depth. One thing we would like to see is try to get an idea of what Mike Munchak's ideal right tackle would be. Obviously, Jawan James may not be the answer, especially after the 2021 season, where it's looking pretty doubtful that the Broncos do anything in terms of extending him, and maybe even look. I don't know how the right tackle is going to look in the draft, maybe better or not, but I believe that whatever the solution is for the right tackle, hopefully the Broncos can look for it in free agency right now, instead of them trying to, maybe try to negotiate a trade during the regular season before week 8. And, I'll even bring this up. I just recently, I played Madden. So if you've ever seen me live stream, I just did the live draft, and it is so nerve-wracking just trying to figure out, even when you're playing virtual GM, it's still nerve-wracking when you have 2 to 3 good players who they give you a combine report, and it's okay, this guy excelled in, blah, 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 and then this guy did blah, blah. So it's and you only have 2 minutes to pick, and it's it's so nerve-wracking. And then when you pick, it's oh yeah, you made a good choice, but it doesn't tell you what the report was for the other players that were picked by the other teams, until you get to see them play on the field. So, but so I can kind of understand what George Payton was going through when, when the Broncos came up in number 9, and it's oh crap, what do I do? Who do I want? Who do I take? It's probably a moment that he envisioned so much when he first became GM, and then when it finally happened, he probably maybe he froze. Even though he had 10 minutes to make a decision. What do you think, Rich?
No, we leave all the freezing to Isaiah. Sorry. Anyways, I had to throw that in. I mean, it was just an underhand lob as far as I was concerned. So, I mean, if I can there's a couple comments that I'd actually like to speak to, kind of tied into James. So I'll kind of speak to one. If you can pull one of the ones up there, I think Johnny was the one that brought it up on what we think we're going to do with regards to Jawan James. It ties pretty much directly with what I want to say. So I think if Jawan James was our answer at all, then the Broncos would have come out within a couple hours before the NFL was able to come out with anything official, as they did, where the NFL basically all but called the Broncos out to say, you better not pay him. I think that if the Broncos saw Jawan James as an answer at the right tackle position, we would have come out and said, hey, Jawan James is our guy at right tackle for next year. He was training for us. He was training for the Broncos in the upcoming 2021 season. We're going to take care of him. Here's the $10 million. See you next year. Go Broncos. Mm-hmm. Instead, I think what's probably going to happen, and this kind of speaks, I think, to what Johnny's question there was, I think we're going to see the Broncos probably pay his medical bills, allow him to keep all of his bonus money and everything like that he would otherwise need to pay back. If we really wanted to, we could actually start clawing money back from him. I do not think that's a good look for the Broncos. So I think we maybe even pay him half of his 2021 salary, plus letting him keep what he, the $3 million and the $150K. I think we even give him $5 million of his $10 million salary, and then we basically have him sign and I have been waived, as in bye-bye, the rest is gone, and now I go to another team. And I think that's a fair approach for the Broncos given the circumstances and what we have already paid him as a team. And then Jawan James can go elsewhere next season.
Very well said, my friend. Underdog Eric has a question for us. He says, I enjoy what you guys do here. I admire the positive outlooks on your respective team, but I've been waiting since the week of the draft to ask, what's the deal with the Bears hate here as of late? Now, I haven't said anything bad about the Bears. I've said this countless times about the Bears trading up to get Justin Fields. I believe that was a great move. And had the roles been reversed, where it was Denver who wanted Justin Fields, say for a fact, I'm pretty sure they would have traded up to get him. The Bears were very lucky, in fact, because supposedly, from what I read in reports, the Vikings were in the market to get to. They wanted Justin Fields, but unfortunately, the Bears upsided them. They traded up. I don't remember what the Bears gave up. They gave up a couple picks, I believe. But to me, I think it's great. It's a great idea. Unfortunately, George Payton did not want Justin Fields. He didn't want Mac Jones. There's speculation that he was big on Trey Lance. And unfortunately, Trey Lance went to the 49ers. So if it was down to Trey Lance, Justin Fields, and Mac Jones at the 9th pick, I'm pretty sure that George Payton would have went Trey Lance. So to me, Justin Fields, hopefully he works out in Chicago. That Matt Nagy system, it can be kind of, I guess it depends on the quarterback. He could decide to, kind of uproot that Andy Reid-ish type of teaching that he learned when he was with the Chiefs. So the Bears just now have to kind of figure out what they want to do with Andy Dalton and maybe even try to unload Nick Foles somewhere.
I think we got some clarification. That wasn't my quote, underdog, just to be very clear.
Generational talent. It's probably, I don't know if it was said on the show or if it was said somewhere on the MHRT network, but do you remember ever saying this, Rich?
I never said that. I was hit or miss on quarterback, and I actually did. I went. Oh, there we go.
Oh, the boss said that.
Yeah, the boss man. Yeah. So for me, I started off on the build a team around Drew, and then I went back and I dug deeper into statistics, and the odds of Drew working out were looking less and less likely, just given on long-term statistical analysis of dozens and dozens of quarterbacks, given where Drew's at right now. Now, that being said, I actually went back to my original position after I looked at what I felt the weaknesses were on our team and the offensive coordinator's ineptitude. He's absolutely, just boggles my mind that he's still hired. So I actually went back to what my original spot was after kind of digging a little bit deeper into it. And my stance was, I didn't think we should draft Justin Fields. I thought we should have drafted both lines and in middle linebacker to bolster our team overall and improve the ceiling and floor of our team collectively. And if Drew doesn't work out, okay, but maybe give him the full 2 years and or bring in another veteran quarterback either in the offseason or someone like Teddy Bridgewater to, again, raise the floor of that quarterback room and see where we can go from there. Worst case scenario, we end up back at maybe, I guess, pick 9, although I think that it's unlikely if you continue to build the talent on a team sport like football that you're going to be back in that top 10 again. And that's okay because you have a more desirable spot for a quarterback to land, and you're in a position where you're comfortable with trading away 1, 2, maybe even a second round, like 2 firsts and a second or 2 seconds to get back up into that upper echelon of picks to get your quarterback because you have a better team around him now.
No, that's very well true. And to bring up another from our good friend Eric, he says, then there was the Bears are awful at talent evaluation on the Nothing Rhymes podcast. LOL. Not taking shots, but our teams have had pretty interchangeable players over the past 10 years or so. And that's actually very true because
that is.
our secondary is literally the Bears. Our head coach came from the Bears, and we gave the Bears Jay Cutler. We gave the Bears Danny Trevathan. And and just recently we gave him Elijah Wilkinson, who, as long as you guys play him at guard, he should be fine. Don't play him at right tackle.
I agree.
So I totally agree with you on that, Eric. And but I can't defend what anybody else on this network says in terms of what their beliefs are on certain players. Unfortunately, you're going to have to take that up with them.
Can we get Trevathan back? I'll take him back right now. No draft picks. I'll just take him back if you don't want him. He's awesome. I love that guy.
Hey, keep those fingers crossed. You
I
never
know.
know. Well, let's move on to Ann Rivera, who has a question for us. She says, Broncos scored 20 points in only 6 games in 2020. How do they improve? Well, you know what? You might get your answer on June 1st, as much as you might not. You might be hearing me say that a lot. If what is speculated to happen can happen, the Broncos so-called Super Bowl chances are going to skyrocket if one Aaron Rodgers does come to town. But if he doesn't, and it's left to it's just going to be a question mark, really. Like you could probably add another question mark to that question, Ann, because we don't know what we're going to get out of Drew Lock in year 3. We're hoping for a Josh Allen improvement type of season. If Teddy Bridgewater wins the game, wins the starting position, are we going to get the Teddy Bridgewater we saw in Carolina, or are we going to get a regressed form of Teddy Bridgewater that we kind of saw when he was in Minnesota? Are we going to see a revitalized Bridgewater that we saw in New Orleans when he came in for Drew Brees for a couple of games? I don't know. But I guess to answer your question, Rara, in my opinion, it all depends on who's under center. If it's Drew Lock, you can add another question mark to that because it's going to be a flip of the coin. If it's Teddy Bridgewater, it can probably stay the same and make it be better. It'll probably fall more on the defense, trying to bail the offense out in terms of interceptions or fumbles or 3 and outs. But if it's Aaron Rodgers, I gotta believe that we're definitely playoff bound in that case.
Yeah, it also depends on what offense we're going with too, right? I've been saying on a couple different pods now that we need to own a specific offensive identity. In fact, Don, you and I were talking about before the pod started, just backstage. I'm a huge fan of Quinn Miners in that signing or that draft pick, and when you look at what Quinn does in his style of play, he does not get pushed back or pushed around that often. He does from time to time. It happens, and it's going to happen probably once or twice in the NFL, but it's just not going to happen regularly. And when he does, he typically recovers quite quickly and well. It's what we saw Cushenberry struggle with quite a bit last season, and it's part of the reason why we ended up digging ourselves into that hole, particularly in the early portion of the season last year. So what it's going to come down to is Shurmur going to try and reinstall the first iteration of the offense that we saw last season? And if so, I think that you're going to probably see Miners end up doing probably better at center. You're going to see Muti probably do better at guard than Glasgow. And that would be our best offensive line to put out on the field because they are better at what Shurmur would command in that offense for a blocking scheme. On the flip side, I still think Moody's the better guard because I really like him. And I think he can push people around, and I think that's awesome. I still think Miners is probably the better center, but I also think Reisner will then show out better under the second version of our offensive blocking, particularly in the run game, of what we saw with the pulling guards, because Reisner is more nimble and is capable of getting to the edge, sealing it, and blocking well. So if we go to the latter part of the blocking scheme that we saw last year, where we were able to block much better in the run game, I think we'll see Williams, I think we'll see Gordon continue to take those steps forward. Williams coming in as a rookie, obviously, and run the ball really well, which is going to be something that Drew Lock can really lean on and build off of. And so it really depends on what our offensive identity is going to be. And I think that will be a huge factor in how successful we are. And more importantly, as you pointed out, the points. The other thing that, if I can just steal just an extra minute there, is having those 2 other linemen on the field when you get into the 20s. The really good teams like your Kansas Cities, your Buffalo Bills, your New Orleans Saints, we brought them up with Teddy Bridgewater when he was there earlier in the pod. They pushed guys around. Even Green Bay, actually, if you look at their offensive line, they did the same thing. They pushed guys around when they got into the red zone to get the ball from the 20s into the end zone, get it as 6 points rather than having to kick for the 3, right? And we too often last year ended up settling for 3 or not getting 3. So I think we need to start getting the ball into the end zone more, and we need to start putting bigger bodies, stronger bodies out there.
Very well said, my friend. Shadowjacker had a question for us that I skipped over. I do apologize, Shadowjacker. I had to go back and find it. If we land Rodgers and win a ring, will this solidify the Broncos as the place to be for any aging elite quarterbacks? Now, I believe, Shadowjacker, that this question has already been answered by the last couple of years, by history, matter of fact. We saw what happened when Peyton Manning came over to Denver. He came in as a free agent. So the thing with Peyton Manning was an interesting pickup because everybody knew that he was on borrowed time. There was a reason why the Indianapolis Colts passed up on not giving Peyton Manning another contract, because they saw what we all saw was, there was not a lot of confidence in the surgeries he had, especially since he had to go overseas to go get them. And it was kind of like, okay, you could be good for, maybe 2-3 years, but then what's going to happen after that? What's going to happen if your arm, if you can't throw anymore? Like, obviously Peyton Manning's mind was still, sharp as a tack. That never went away. But unfortunately, when we started, 2015 and towards the end of 2014, that playoff against the Colts, you kind of started seeing like that arm. It's, it wasn't starting to go, but you could kind of start seeing that, it was starting to kind of give in and out. And it's like, okay, this could be an issue. And we were so lucky to have such an amazing defense that season, because without that defense, we are not world champions in 2015.
Peyton was in a constant battle with his physical traits starting to slide near the back end of his career here. And he literally owes his success due to just how sharp his mental mindset was. He was able to do things that most people probably wouldn't have been able to do. And I think that speaks volumes to his work ethic and his ability to adapt on the fly pretty quickly. He had to adapt to several different offenses when he was here. He also had to adapt on the fly to his physical traits declining. In fact, there's even multiple reports where he started losing full feeling in his hand near the back end of his career here in Denver. And I mean, you can only think about that. Your job and your role on a team is touch on a football, which pretty much relies on you being able to feel the football in your hand. If you can't feel a football in your hand, how do you expect to be able to drop a pass in the right way? So I think that really, really speaks volumes to Peyton Manning and the reason why he was a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Yeah. Also, I forgot to add, the Bucs bringing in Tom Brady was the second part of that. So they've created a formula that a lot of teams are going to try to replicate. Now, obviously, I hate bringing this point up, but John Elway tried to do the Peyton Manning 2.0, bringing in Joe Flacco in 2019, and that backfired miserably. And our good friend Underdog Eric adds, Rodgers to the Broncos would make them instant contenders. Judy and a couple of first rounders for a trade. Rodgers has a habit of making even mediocre wide receivers look like stars. So just imagine what he can do in Denver. And that's actually very true there, Rich. I'm not going to lie about that. I mean, who else but Rodgers knew who Kumaro was, or what was his other one? Lazard. Everybody in Green Bay only knew who Devontae Adams was, and to a certain extent, Randall Cobb when he was there. Your Jordy Nelsons, but Rodgers just has that ability as a veteran to say, I'm pretty sure this is while they're training. He can see, hey, this guy can run fast, so let me use him in a slot route, or this guy can cut really good. Let me use him for deep or something like that. So the fact that he can see what wide receivers, and not just wide receivers at that, tight ends can, what they can do is just, unbelievable. Now, the big question is what Denver will have to give up, because I'm pretty sure if Green Bay does agree to a trade, it's going to come at a steep price.
For starters, I have to agree with the vast majority of the comments here. When I heard us getting Flacco, the first thing I said was our offensive line is nowhere good enough to keep Flacco and all 6'6" of him upright, because he is just hot garbage at that point in his career. And sadly, I was correct. Unfortunately, our team, for whatever reason, did not want to put Drew Lock out there. And I still to this day, don't fully understand the reasons why, because when he started, he went 4-1. So again, it seems almost like, whomever was in behind the scenes, whether it be Elway or the head coaches, I don't know, but why keep Flacco out there when Drew was in fact at least ready to go for a couple weeks before then? Who knows what we could have done that last season. hindsight again being 2020, it was what it was, and we did what we did. But you can't compare Joe Flacco and Peyton Manning in any way, shape, or form. They don't even belong to be spoken in the same sentence in terms of quality of players.
Very well said. Biggie Bronco joins in. Thank you, my friend. He says they had Peyton Manning's neck and back taped up so much in that Super Bowl. It's a miracle he was even able to throw it. Now, I actually didn't know that or ever hear about that. But I wouldn't put it past him. But then again, I did see Peyton Manning jumping up and down towards the end of that game, and it didn't look like he was taped. And if it was, it probably came off after that what was it, that sack fumble that Cam Newton gave up.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's not the case. But my high prophet also, guess who we had on the show last week? He says, don't forget that with deep playoff runs and dare I say a Super Bowl victory, our first round picks will be very late first round picks. Richie, your thoughts?
Yeah, that's fine. But and we actually combated that in the Peyton Manning years with what I would argue is very much a George Payton draft strategy, right? We traded back to try and regain some draft capital to kind of bring up some additional draft capital, if you will, to kind of get in the very bottom end of the first or multiple second round picks to allow us to further stack our roster while still picking late in that first round. And I think that very much fits with a George Payton draft strategy that he's all but showed us even this past draft, which is patience, even though you might be screaming at your TV set when you're seeing the picks come in, say, freaking trade up and do it now. So, it's one of those things where, it can be frustrating sometimes as a fan, especially when you're looking at where certain things are sitting on the roster. But I do think that picking in the later part of the first round typically means that you already have a reasonably talent-filled roster to begin with, so you can afford to condense your picks into that mid-second round or early second round and still keep your roster strong.
Very well. I do agree with you. And, kind of to summarize our show today, because we're starting to head towards the end of the show, folks, is whoever the Broncos decide to pick up a right tackle, we have to trust that I want to say Peyton and Mike Munchak have in their best interest to say, this is the guy that is going to keep our quarterback not only clean, but safe, whether it's Drew Lock, whether it's Teddy Bridgewater, or hell, if they trade for Aaron Rodgers. Either one of those three quarterbacks, whether you like them, you hate them, or you don't care for them, should not have to end up with an injury like the one Drew Lock suffered against the Steelers. Because the Broncos are going to play a team eventually that's going to have a defensive line like the Steelers or close to it, and it's going to be like, okay, these guys mean business. And if our offensive line, if they can't open holes for guys like Gordon and Williams to run through, or if they can't protect the quarterback and give him time to throw the ball downfield to let our guys make the catch, then the Broncos have, then there's a problem. So hopefully the right tackle position is hopefully the last link in the chain that says, okay, we finally got your right tackle. The guards have to improve their play, because to me, they kind of took a step back last year. I know Glasgow was dealing with injuries. Dalton Reisner was dealing with an injury, but it wasn't something that was serious. But I do feel that his gameplay kind of fell backwards. And Cushenberry, obviously he was a rookie and he struggled, and he could end up he'd be at risk of losing his job to the gut if the gut goes out and puts some good tape out there in preseason.
I agree. The other thing that I don't want to say I don't fully agree with your point, but I don't fully agree with your point, is I think the other concerning piece that kind of counters what you said there was almost immediately after the draft, George Payton in his post-draft presser says, and we're going to go out and get a whole bunch of blocking tight ends. And so to me, that was like, I want to say like a stab or an undercut or a punch to the gut, if you want, to some of the offensive linemen there. But basically that all but said, and we need extra blocking help. And I can't imagine that with the loss of Juwan James, and who knows, our right tackle at this point in the season, that comment is going to change. We may also see our team revert to a similar thing to what we saw, I want to say, in the 2016 season with the Raiders did, where they brought in an additional offensive lineman. So what we may actually see is Moody, the right tackle, whoever that may be at this point. And then we may see Glasgow even coming in to bookend all of them to try and add additional push on the offensive line. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw something like that either.
Right. Well, they did go out and get, what was his name? Eric Saubert, tight end, formerly with Jacksonville, and former Bear as well. So, the connection between Denver and Chicago is still there. It's still strong. So Mike Munchak could decide to use them as blocking tight ends if need be. We did get rid of Nick Van Nett. He's gone. And we're getting back a healthy Alberto. Noah Fant's going to be back to his normal self, fully healthy, we do hope. But Jason O'Neill comes in and he says, okay, what's the deal with the lock hate? I hear and see so many negative posts within Broncos country. It's like the naysayers don't want to give Lock a chance, and then we have those all in for Lock. Well, you know what? To kind of clarify, from my personal opinion, Jason, a year ago, we were all on the Lock train because we were all going off of what we saw the last 5 games in Drew Lock. I mean, it was amazing. It was great. It was amazing, totally different from what we saw from the statue Joe Flacco and struggling Brandon Allen, who took over for Joe Flacco. And that's exactly what we thought we were going to get for a whole 17 games or 16 games. I'm sorry. But unfortunately, it didn't happen. And, the media built up Drew Lock to be such a great, the next Mahomes, the next Lamar Jackson, the next rookie sensation basically be. And unfortunately, it just fell flat. So all the people that were Broncos, that were Lock haters, just all of a sudden there was just a line that shot through like a crack in the ground. And now you have half the people in Broncos country that love Drew Lock and half the people that hate him and think that we should trade for him, and probably are going to be the most happier of everybody should the Broncos go out and trade for Aaron Rodgers. So at this point, Drew Lock just needs to kind of, take a step back, take a breath in. If he would have had some type of mentorship last season or even the year before, if Joe Flacco would have been a much nicer guy, we probably would have had a much different Drew Lock last season. But because he'd had no mentorship, and I don't want to put it on the pandemic either with no preseason or what have you, but that is a bit of a factor. The fact that Drew Lock just kind of had to go out there and try to repeat what he did in those last 5 games, and he went out a whole season and he was hurt, and he made all the interceptions, and it just didn't go that way, didn't work in his favor. So the pressure's on him to be better in 2021 if he gets to start. Right.
So I don't think there's any one of us, and I'm very much echoing, at least to the majority of what I've heard Mundungus say early in kind of the Mile High Roundtable that on Thursdays coming up this Thursday is I don't think there's any one of us that don't want to see Drew succeed. Ultimately, that is the best possible outcome for the Denver Broncos. If we do not have to go on yet another quarterback search, that is the absolute best possible outcome for our Denver Broncos. Mm-hmm. I do think, though, that one thing that we do need to take a half step back with is, as a professional NFL quarterback, even with an offensive coordinator change and a playbook change, particularly when you're in a lockdown state where you have nothing else to do but read a playbook and perhaps practice things and whatnot, that at some point you should also be focusing on doing some of the things that we saw Quinn Miners do in his YouTube videos and in some of his interviews, which is he realized that he was likely going to need to learn how to play center and learn how to do it well. So what did Quinn do? He went and started practicing religiously the center position and literally set up garbage cans and things to snap the ball back into to nail that new position and that new spot. I think what we saw from Drew Lock in 2019 was a promising young quarterback here in Broncos country. And I was certainly one of those that said, I'm really happy with what I saw in 2019. He came in, he struggled, what you expect a rookie quarterback to do, but we still went 4-1. What we needed to see is Drew Lock pick one or two things that he struggled with in the 2019 season and work on fixing them.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, he did not do those things, and he did not do them. And if he did do them, he didn't do them well enough, and clearly he didn't do them religiously enough, in my opinion, to commit them into muscle memory, where it just becomes second nature to you, where you're not constantly thinking about them. And yes, I understand that some of those things will take in-game play to course correct and whatnot. And we did start to see some of that in the back end of the 2020 season. The problem is that as a Broncos fan, that's a little bit too late for you to start picking up on some of those things. We needed to see you start doing it a little bit earlier than that. So can Drew Lock recover and come back in 2021 after Peyton Manning's mentorship, as well as other things? Sure, it's possible. But I do think that it is fair at this point that if he was basically gifted the 2020 job as a starting quarterback and he did not seemingly put in the work that he needed to do in the offseason to nail it, that I do think skepticism is warranted for the 2021 season for Drew Lock.
Very well said, my friend. But unfortunately, folks, we are running out of time, and that's going to have to do it for today's show. I want to thank everybody in the live chat today. Glenn, Kenneth, Biggie, Bronco. I did see George Maravi came in kind of late. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you, George.
Kenneth Booker. Who else am I missing? Vic. Trying to go through the name. Mr. Boggins, of course, as always. The boss, McCreasy. There was also some names that I do apologize if I missed. Mohammed Badri, Shadowjacker, Ivan Diaz, thank you. Mark Langley was here for a little bit. Thank you so much.
Mile High Prophet came in.
Jason O'Neill, John Bakke, of course, from Nothing Rhymes With. Richard Martins, who was here. Thank you so much, my friend. And I don't know if I said Underdog Eric. Thank you so much. And everybody else, Ann Rivera as well. Thank you. And thank you so much to everybody.
I appreciate it. Guys, I just want to quickly jump in. Trying to grow the show, trying to get as many people in here live to have these awesome conversations back and forth. We do try to bring in as many people in comments as we possibly can. If you could help us grow the show, we need you to like, share, mention it to your friends, all those things, so we can get more people in these live streams and live comments to get you guys involved. We want other fans just like you here with us every Tuesday.
That's very well said. And to kind of quote what Richie says, you guys can follow us on the social medias. We're on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You can watch us after the fact if were not able to watch us live at MHRT Podcast on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. If you want to reach out to us individually, my Twitter tag is at a 6'10" Mexican, all one word, and my co-host is at Richie Riche at RICHIRICHEH. If you guys want to contact us directly, talk about football, we're more than always welcome to, answer your questions, comments, or whatever you have to say. Just say hi, But to kind of do some plugs for other shows, guys, make sure you watch the Mile High Roundtable podcast that airs every Thursday at 6:00. You'll be able to see myself as well as the boss McCreasy, our good friend Glenn Hauser, who has a Broncos museum that's probably the biggest in the world. And of course, Mr. Boggins, who is very knowledgeable on the game of football itself. So make sure you catch us live every Thursday at 6. And on Sunday, make sure you watch the Nothing Rhymes With podcast that starts at 5 Central Time, I believe. And they have a very special guest. Folks, the leader of the Bronco gang.
Hey, Don, we got to call out this coming Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern.
Oh, that's right.
6 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Mountain. We have Mile High Roundtable featuring Luke Patterson of Mile High Huddle, who's coming on with the rest of you guys this Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
And again on Sunday, like we have every week, we have the newest addition to the Mile High Roundtable family in Nothing Rhymes with Orange and Blue with Johnny and Isaiah.
Yes, thank you so much for the reminder, Rich. I totally almost blanked out.
And are we allowed to announce who their guest is going to be? Is that that's public now?
That's where I was getting at.
All right.
The Nothing Rhymes With podcast guys are going to have the leader of the Bronco gang, the Mad Fanatic himself. He's a really great guy, probably one of the biggest Bronco fans you'll ever meet. So make sure you watch him live. Come on, be with Johnny and Isaiah as they sit down and talk Broncos stuff about the draft and what have you, and just get his thoughts and ideas for the show. So again, Luke Patterson from MHH will be on the Mile High Roundtable on Thursday. So make sure you guys catch that. To our audio listeners, if you're listening to us after the fact, please make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. If you're listening to us on Anchor, you want to be a monthly supporter, we really do appreciate it. Or if you're on Amazon or Google, just hit the review, tell your friends. And again, folks, before we go, so with all these injuries, it's starting to kind of build up for the Broncos. Kind of wanted to say a little prayer, so that way, as we continue during the off season, that we do not get any more injuries to any more of our star players. So I'm going to hold up my cup and I'm going to say to the Manning, to the Miller, to the Davis, to the Elway, make sure nobody gets injured on game day. So with that being said, folks, have a good night. We'll see you all next Tuesday. Oh, I'm sorry. Rich, did you have anything to add before we go?
I think you're too tall to do the Mile High Five, aren't you? You hit the ceiling.
Oh, that's right. We forgot to do the Mile High Five on 3. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Mile High Five. We got to work on that. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us today. Have a good night.